First of all, welcome to our product webinar here. I'm Yellowdig's Head of Client Success. In my role here at Yellowdig, I spend a lot of my time talking with instructors about how to get the most out of the platform. I'm responsible for a lot of the research into our data and research partnerships. So if you ever want to start one, please talk to me. And we're happy to sort of help out with getting you data or coordinating on data. Possibly being involved in some analyses. The other thing I do is help oversee all of the sort of technical support and student support. So I get a really full-rounded picture of success with the platform from all aspects. I'm joined here with by Tyler, a couple of my other colleagues that are definitely going to be in the chat during the webinar. Tyler specifically is going to sort of surface any questions to me that I might want to address while I'm talking. Please definitely feel free to keep those going. We'll either address them in the middle or revisit them at the end. And I guess that's about all of the housekeeping. Is there anything that I missed so far, Tyler?
No, not at all. Seeing some familiar faces here, some folks that joined us yesterday on our Capello guest webinar. If that sounds interesting to you, it is live on our YouTube channel. And I do want to mention that this is going to be a recorded session that we will also distribute after the webinar. So if you'd like a recording, look for that in your inbox. And otherwise, I'll let you take it away, Brian. I'll go on mute. I'll pop in as needed.
Yep, sure. All right, well, without further ado, Yellowdig's real mission as a company is to create communities where social interactions and learning are going to build the skills and relationships that are going to allow people to thrive. As an education company, we're really focused on how we can, improve student learning and help them in all aspects of their journey. In the past, we've asked a lot about why do learners really need communities and places to really interact with one another. And these are some of the answers that we've gotten along the way. And I think most of these are sort of growing in importance now in a world where the campus is disappearing for a lot of students, or maybe is questionably going to be there for the fall. One thing I would add on that note is, at Yellowdig, we've been focused on this for years because, those things we think are really important, and they are and were important even when campuses were around. Our technology definitely helps build those communities, even if it's in a supplemental role to what might be happening on campus. But these are the kinds of things that people have mentioned to us about why communities are important. Building affinity for the university, getting, improving instructor presence, getting people more connected to the institution itself, maybe connecting things that are in a course to the real world, integrating knowledge between learners with different levels of expertise and different backgrounds. Getting exposure to really cutting edge information, maybe just building certain knowledge and communication skills that are really relevant, in today's world where we are connected, through technology. Building retention of students, helping them find friends, helping them reduce sort of the boredom of some classes maybe, or helping them through the really hard parts of other ones. All of these things are super important. And that's why we've chosen to focus there. And they're also, all important across all aspects of the student life cycle. So, a lot of times we think about the formal learning space as the most relevant thing, that a college does. And while we believe that that's fairly true, there are a lot of other things that the students are encountering throughout the student life cycle that really has a major impact on their ability to meet their educational goals and finish their degree. And communities can be really relevant throughout that entire life cycle. So although we will be focusing in large part on sort of, or a lot of the data I'll be talking about will focus on sort of the course-based use case, there are a lot of other areas where communities are super important and where Yellowdig can easily help create those communities. If you're not very familiar with Yellowdig, here's a GIF of it on the right-hand side. It looks, similar to a modern social media with a single scrolling feed. There are aspects of that design that we think are really super important. I'll talk about some of those to begin with, or in a minute. One important thing about Yellowdig is that it was built with and for educators, and solving a lot of the problems that universities are facing. And so it is private, it's highly configurable. We do a number of things with branding. Security is hugely important on college campuses and getting into FERPA compliance. The platform is also built from the ground up to be very accessible to all of your students. So these are all things that are really important to colleges and universities, and that we've focused on. One other really important aspect of Yellowdig is the gamified system and various of the other functionalities like notifications, which really help get students engaged and actually participating, and gets really good conversations going and helps build those communities and get those kick-started. And so not only are we providing the functionality for students to connect to one another, but there's an element of Yellowdig that is also promoting them actually connecting, right? So just having the tool doesn't mean people will necessarily use it. And that's one thing that Yellowdig is really focused on solving and sort of building strong communities. There are a number of other student engagement platforms that have drawn comparisons to Yellowdig, and we certainly have overlaps with some of their functionality. But because Yellowdig was designed to be used in higher ed with a lot of higher ed institutions, there are things that we have focused on that other companies and other technologies have not. Yellowdig is primarily an asynchronous platform. So, unlike Zoom, it is intended for students to be able to interact at any time, through students or instructors to interact at any time and in between, various other sessions you might have. There are the ability to meet federal compliance initiatives from our data. Our data is a really important part of what differentiates Yellowdig, both in what administrators have access to, but also in allowing instructors to see their outcomes, compare themselves to other communities, and find ways to improve their own teaching. Yellowdig has also been backed by really clear efficacy research. We have a lot of research into how and why the platform works, and some of that is published or done through sort of independent organizations. And it's really clear that Yellowdig has positive impacts on student retention and satisfaction. I mentioned before our sort of data security and accessibility advantages as well. So before I jump into a demo, are there any questions that have come up, Tyler, that I should jump to? Or if anybody does have a question, please throw it in there quickly. Otherwise, I'll move on to the demo.
No questions yet.
Okay. So, this is what Yellowdig looks like when a student lands in it. And I'll actually just trigger, if I can find my mouse, here we go. I'll actually just trigger a launch. So, this is Yellowdig integrated inside of Canvas. And the experience for a student is, Yellowdig is put in as an LTI tool. they'll click a link either in the left nav or in an assignment, depending on how you integrate it into the course. And they'll simply land into the community for that specific course. If they don't have an account, we create an account for them based on information from Canvas that is sent to our system. And it just opens within a window, or it can be launched as a separate sort of web page itself. So that's the kind of experience that you get for a student in terms of getting into the community. Access is controlled by the course roster. I guess one thing that I would want to point out is that, you know, this same this same workflow will work for any kind of course. And what we see people do in a lot of cases is set up non-credited courses for other kinds of student groups that, you know, allows you to manage the roster for students that you might want into specific communities, like a new student orientation, or you know, a class cohort or something like that. There are also a number of sort of single sign-on options where we could do deeper integrations or have the ability for students to sign in through other systems. And there are a number of ways that individual communities that you can just invite students directly to individual communities with links or with email invites. So there are a lot of different ways that you can get students into Yellowdig from different areas. You know, one of the most common with universities is just the LTI standard through most learning management systems, which is what we're looking at here. Yeah, there is a question in the chat about LTI or learning management systems. We have been able to integrate with basically every learning management system that I'm aware of, as long as it's using the LTI standard. Our LTI integration is very typical, so it works pretty much out of the box with any of the learning management systems. So this is the experience that students will get. They'll land into the single community for Yellowdig with a single scrolling feed. You know, they can create posts, which are sort of the top level of content, and then you know, other students or instructors can reply to those posts and create comments, and those sort of stay together in strings. You know, students can do things like add emoji reactions to posts. There are the ability to hashtag and add @mentions. So if a student wants to particularly alert another student or their instructor, they can just @mention them inside of a post, and a notification will be dispatched to the person that was mentioned. Other things that are pretty relevant, instructors have the ability to put these accolades onto specific posts to recognize them for different things. Here's a post that received a number of accolades, but you have the ability to create different colors, different images. You can name them different things, and you can make them worth different numbers of points in our point system. So these are really configurable, and you can do different interesting things with them. This one here is a sort of verified response badge that is one of my favorite examples. So you can put this onto a post if a student has answered another student's question and you want to just say, hey, that's the right answer. Everybody should pay attention to it. And these accolades can be used as filters. So if I click on this accolade, it'll filter the feed to only show posts that have been marked with that accolade. And in this case, there's only one. But those accolades work as filters. And so, you know, there's other examples that you could use here if you want to just recognize sort of different levels of content or different, you know, specific things in a post. Let's see. There is the ability to mark posts as read so that you can then filter out posts and only see unread content. All of the filtering capabilities are up at the top, and they can be added on top of one another. So if I wanted to find a post by a specific member in a specific date range, maybe with a specific hashtag or topic, I can add those all together to really drill down and find specific content. So, we know from our research that having a community occupy one sort of scrolling feed really gets students into and involved in the content. The active content pops to the top, so it's there. But one thing I think people worry about is being able to find the specific content when you need to find something that was posted or find something specific, some specific topic. And so we've created this really robust filtering functionality to help ensure that you can do that. And there's also sort of a full text search of the community that will highlight any posts that have specific search terms in it. So the ability to find content within Yellowdig is there and pretty robust, and we think works pretty well. As far as the student experience of posting content, they would click on the create button. They can create a new post that they would just add a title to. And then, in the bottom here, they can do the things like I mentioned @mentioning. It pulls up a full list of the course, and I could, @mention specific people. There's a hashtagging capability. So I can either add and create new hashtags or use hashtags that have already been put in by other users. Within the posts, you can add topics. These topics are configurable by the instructor in the settings area, but these would be populated by the instructor or instructional team. And when I'm posting, I have the ability to add multiple tags to a post if I want to, indicate that there are sort of multiple topics. You can, as a designer or as the instructor, require that students post using a topic when they post. So that's one way to make sure that sort of every post has some kind of topic associated with it. And those topics are really used again as filters in the feed. So if there was a specific thing I wanted people to study for the midterm, I could direct them to filter by that topic and find it. Other things, an exciting feature, I think, for Yellowdig Engage, especially for anybody that might be using Classic, is the ability to record video directly inside of the feed. So I would be able to just capture a video, introduce myself. Maybe one interesting use that we've seen of this is somebody did an online poster session where they had every student present a poster using the video. And then invited in outside instructors and other students to be able to give them feedback on their poster presentation and sort of had back and forth conversations with those students. So I thought that was a pretty cool use of that video feature, but you can capture those directly into the feed now. There is also the ability to draw within the feed, unless you're a really good art student with a stylus, you might not be able to draw very, very nicely, something that we would want to actually print or post. But one thing that we've seen that people really have used this feature for is to sort of upload a background image and then be able to annotate on top of it or call attention to something specifically within the, within that image. For, say, science courses, being able to kind of edit a molecule or point to a specific part of a process diagram. This drawing feature has been really useful for those kinds of things. You can add emojis to posts as you're posting. You can add video clips, basically any file. Another interesting thing that we like to see people use and that instructors have reported to us really work out as a engagement opportunity is to create polls and have students respond to polls which come up in the community. Tyler, I don't know if there's any questions or anything that you would want me to point to. Here's one of those polls actually, in the post itself.
Yeah, a few questions. I do apologize if there's some background noise on my end. There's some masonry work happening right outside of my home. Um, Many questions about LMS integration. For anyone that would like to see Yellowdig in a different LMS, please send us a note after the webinar. We would be happy, someone on my team would be happy to walk you through a demonstration or discuss what LMS integration looks like, say in Blackboard or D2L or other places. There was one question about, why or why not we can't just go into a live university and maybe demonstrate what a live course in Yellowdig looks like. The reason for that is that Yellowdig is a FERPA compliant platform, which in the United States relates to student privacy and security. And most nations at this point have some requirements in education that state that the student's content that is related to their learning, especially any of that content that might end up impacting their grade, that needs to be respected, the privacy of that content. So we will never demonstrate a live university for that reason. On the flip side, know that your data is safe and secure with Yellowdig. Unlike other platforms that you may consider using, especially public social media, you need not worry that your student data or your data, your IP, the content that you're creating in this platform, it is yours. Another question was about the use of Yellowdig Engage on the mobile device. For those that maybe have used Yellowdig in the past, you may have noticed that we had a mobile application. Our new platform is mobile optimized and it is designed with mobile in mind. So what Brian's doing here is quickly showing what happens when you have less screen to use the platform. So if a student were to say access a notification, maybe Brian mentions me on one of my posts. I'll receive that notification in my email. Maybe I'm walking on campus or at home. I can click that notification and jump directly to that in my phone. For those of you who might use the LMS mobile application, whether it's the Canvas student app or the Blackboard app, or maybe you have a student portal application that the students use to access a learning management system, Yellowdig can link right through that and provide access quite seamlessly as well.
Yeah, and part of the reason that I brought up this specific website without sort of Canvas around it is just to illustrate also that, Yellowdig is a standalone platform. In reality, we interact or LTI integrate with various learning management systems. But the way that framework works in almost any learning management system is essentially that, Yellowdig is kind of iframed into them. And the experience is very much that this sort of window is sort of built into the LMS in some way, right? So the student experience of that is going to be interacting in some type of frame around this. And the size of that frame kind of dictates, as I was just showing, some of how this would actually display. If your learning management system really shrinks the size of that window, it might look more like the mobile display or the tablet display that I was showing as I shrunk that window. The actual integration functionality is really kind of similar across all of them. If that continues to be a question.
Brian, the only other questions that I'll seed into you now and then let you run. There was a great question about how Yellowdig plays in complement with, say, a synchronous Zoom session. Does Yellowdig have like the notion of live video in the platform? So if you could maybe speak to that, the notion of synchronous versus asynchronous,
yeah,
that would be great.
Yeah, so we've definitely seen people use Yellowdig to coordinate live Zoom sessions. And for that reason, we've been talking about different ways that we can integrate with some of these synchronous tools because people will also sort of use the chat use essentially Yellowdig as a chat window instead of something like Zoom, because you can share images. You would be able to have some of the more fun things or mention specific students as you're going. So that is something that we've seen. One of the synchronous things that you can see evident here I'm actually this person who is Paul Professor. That green ring around my avatar there indicates that I'm currently online. So if there were other students in this community that were currently online, you would see that green ring around them. That does give you some opportunities for synchronous sessions, and one of the, or synchronous conversations where you can direct message people. So one of the ways that we're viewing sort of that synchronous or asynchronous to synchronous continuum is to focus on doing the asynchronous part of this really well, where a lot of students are sort of needing to interact in between other sessions, where other technologies are sort of doing a good job with that space, but then to sprinkle in more and more opportunities for those asynchronous sessions to turn into sort of synchronous interactions or synchronous conversations. And so, as we continue to build on the product, there's a number of things that we're looking to do in that area where we can kind of sprinkle in opportunities for synchronous, but not leaving behind students that might not be able to do the synchronous stuff, right? I mean, with time zones and things like that, a lot of the synchronous sessions become pretty much hard to manage for students. I think that was everything that I wanted to show. So I'm going to jump back into my slides and talk a little bit about some of the concepts behind Yellowdig. And then I'll definitely get back into a community health dashboard before we end, because there's some pretty exciting new things there. So as we think about Yellowdig, typically a lot of people that are using us in classrooms are thinking about it as a sort of replacement for discussion assignments or other peer-to-peer engagement opportunities. And in the standard discussion assignment, there's a learner with a specific set of course requirements to participate. Those requirements are usually something like post once, comment on 2 other students' posts, as an assignment. In this sort of model, the instructor is there to offer engagement and support, probably feedback, usually typically via grade. And peers are there with the idea that they're going to offer social presence, and those couple of comments that they're required to do each will result in an interesting discussion. And I think that this model, by and large, a lot of people realize that it doesn't yield quite the outcomes that people are hoping for. And this is where we see Yellowdig come in, and why we think the community formation is really important. So Yellowdig has a number of features that we think help build a stronger community. Notifications and nudges, getting students to come back in more often, the points and accolades, rewarding good posts that are posted, at times when other students aren't participating, to help drive more back and forth conversation, and sort of incentivize students coming in to post more often. There's also a whole layer of engagement data that we provide for instructors, especially, that let them know what strategies they're using, are actually helping build engagement, right? And all of these things are actually directed at creating behavior change. And it's that behavior change that actually feeds back into a stronger community, and stronger community. And once you get a good community formed, it actually turns that discussion assignment into something that's really engaging, that solves students' problems, and that really helps them persist, and yields all of the positive outcomes that sort of the initial assignment was intended to yield. And so this is how we think about Yellowdig and community formation driving the behavior change that actually creates a really useful, interesting environment for students that they want to participate in. We talk all the time about the things that healthy learning communities require, and this is both in class and anywhere else. They require time and participation. Students have to come in, they have to come back often. Doesn't require a lot of overall time, but the timeline of participation also has a major effect. if students are only coming in once a month and spending 4 hours, is that community going to be as healthy as spending those 4 hours, by just dropping in for, 10 minutes a day or whatever, right? Communities require active participation and regular participation. You have to allow strong conversations to survive and weak conversations to die out, right? No sense talking about something that really doesn't have any value any longer. Focus that time on good conversations. We have to interconnect members. You can't have a healthy community if you have a whole bunch of pods of individuals that actually aren't talking to each other, or if you have a whole bunch of individuals that are off doing their own thing. That's not, by definition, that's not a community. So interconnecting all of the members is really important, and so then is listening, right? If one person is just talking all the time, or everybody in the community is just talking and nobody is listening to each other, you can't have a strong community and sense of sort of belonging and being able to influence that community. And I say all of those things because, Yellowdig's point system, again, was designed to change behavior in a way that would help generate those things. The intention of our point system is that it's a single semester-long assignment where no good conversations have to end, right? And I'll get into a little bit about how the standard discussion model intersects with that. But that was really the intention of Yellowdig, that there's one assignment that runs the entire length of this semester. And that's because we want one strong community that fulfills the needs of the students as that semester goes on. We think it's really important in our point system to have the points for posting and commenting, which were really intended to reward participation, right? Similar to kind of attendance for a course, if you show up and you do sort of the bare minimum of what you're being asked to do, which in this case would be sort of post and comment on other students with a certain number of words, you get your participation grade. And this helps bring in students that might otherwise just not show up at all. Then we use the social points and the instructor accolades to really reward articulate, thoughtful posts. And probably one of the most important things they do that people never think about when they shut them off is that these point areas really actually reward people posting earlier in the week. They discourage procrastination by encouraging and giving a reward for students that come in early, get good conversations started, right? And so these social points definitely change the timeline of participation and get students in there and get good conversations going and maintaining them. So I would highly recommend, if you're using Yellowdig, to definitely give a lot of social points, which are really the part that reward the quality, that get the quality, and that get students to come in earlier and avoid all the problems related to procrastination. I'm sure most people are familiar with the standard discussion assignment framework. This is how we visualized it. But basically the instructor would come in, provide a prompt. All of the students are expected to respond to that prompt, to respond to the instructor, and then comment on other students' posts. In this sort of framework, that first student or first couple of students that come in can't finish their assignment because there's nobody to comment on. The only thing they can comment on is what the instructor posted, right? So what we see is this student will respond to that post, but then they'll come back and they have to come back later. And they sort of learn there's no incentive for them to come in. There's no interesting active conversation going on until the end of the week. So even those who are really motivated to interact with other students will just learn to procrastinate more and more. And the problem with that for a discussion is you need to have back and forth conversation in order to have a conversation, right? You have to have turn taking. And what actually happens in this framework is that there's no time for turn taking. There's no actual time to have a real back and forth conversation. And that's one of the reasons that this framework doesn't work, even if you have really good prompts. even if you have a, even if you as a professor are really a go-getter and you're trying really hard to get your students engaged in this discussion framework, everything is sort of indicating to students that it's better to procrastinate. One other major problem with this in terms of connecting all students, if a person tends to be a procrastinator and come in right before the deadline, they're responding to the post that the professor made, just like every other student, but then they're commenting on posts that other students have created. And nobody has any incentive to ever respond to them because that conversation is over for that week as soon as that deadline hits. And those students that are already in here have already collected all of their points. So this student is literally posting into a void. There is nobody that will ever respond to them. And no matter how interesting or relevant their comments are, and the conversation just then restarts at the next week. So we think that those deadlines are really super damaging. We have a lot of data to show that. But one of the reasons is the students that might need the best role models, that might be having the most struggles in school because of other things that are going on in their world, whatever, those students are the students that are most being isolated by this model. And those are probably students that are being put more at risk than they already are by sort of being isolated from any of the social fabric here. So Yellowdig is really trying to break that down with our point system. And one of the ways that we do that is we encourage students to start their own topics. There never has to be a time that a topic has to end when there's sort of multiple conversations going on concurrently. Because there's no deadlines, those students that are maybe tend to procrastinate towards the end of a week anyway because they have to do all of their work on the weekend or something like that, still has the opportunity then to talk with other students that might tend to do their work at the beginning of the week. One other relevant thing that I always mention is questions within Yellowdig. So we think it's vitally important that students be allowed to ask questions. And in the standard discussion model, where students are being judged for their posts and graded on their posts and the quality of their response to the instructor, no student is going to ask a question admitting that they don't know something because it could hurt their grade. And the entire point of those discussions are sort of show off what you know, right? That style of discussion. Whereas in a community, it's okay to ask questions, and it should be actually rewarded. If that person asks a good question that the rest of the community wants and needs to talk about, it'll get a good conversation started, and that should really be encouraged. And if it's a bad question, nobody will respond to it, right? It'll just get ignored and it will fall down the feed. And so, one way that this point system really works is that it encourages or rewards those things that actually get good conversations started. So I'm going to pause there for a second because I've been talking quite a bit. Are there any questions that have come up that I should answer?
There was a question about, whether Yellowdig is best fit, say, for US students, instructors, whether or not we have any experience globally. And I did address the question, but, Brian, anything that you might want to share just based on your study of like human psychology on why this is different from everything else that people are using?
I think that one thing that we see related to the point system and related to a lot of the use inside of our platform is, first of all, these reward systems and structures sort of work across the board in terms of, students understand they need to get a grade, especially, within courses where there's a grade. You can use other kinds of incentives, like swag for sort of co-curricular orientation communities, but students having some notion that they're going to get something for collecting these points definitely motivates them to get the points, and those points are designed to take that sort of external or extrinsic motivation and convert it into a strong, healthy, interesting community. And once that community is there and there is interesting information that is relevant and useful to the students, they do tend to participate without needing the point system any longer, right? So we think in a lot of cases of that point system as being sort of the flywheel that gets things going and gets the community headed in the right direction. And once that happens, people see the value in participating, and it's not hard to keep them going. And in a lot of our communities, students get 125, 150% of the course requirement on average, right? So almost every student gets to 100, with a lot sort of going well above and beyond that. They wouldn't be voluntarily participating if they weren't seeing value in doing it. And that's a pattern we repeatedly see. Once you get an interesting, healthy community going, people actually enjoy participating, or certainly don't dread it to the extent that most people think about the standard discussion assignment. I personally don't know anybody that likes them, right? And we're basically trying to use various aspects of psychology and human interaction to really provide a lot of the value people see in being there. And just, I mean, across users and across localities, we don't see huge differences in terms of how people respond to that. So we get asked a lot about sort of early undergrads versus professionals, MBAs. I mean, we run a ton of communities with nursing programs, MBAs. We definitely run through some corporate use cases with real, quote unquote, real adults or working adults. And obviously we work with a ton of undergrad level, sort of your 18-year-olds. We've even, done some piloting and things with high schools. So the concepts tend to work generally across all of those different user types and localities. And just to give an idea of some of the things that we see, this is an example of an open-ended community in Yellowdig with the point system established how we would recommend. And when I was talking earlier about sort of reducing procrastination, you can see that the point system in Yellowdig encourages students to kind of come in early, start posting, and getting conversations started. So these gray dots are the deadline, the Sunday sort of weekly rollover for the Yellowdig board. This is actually another community in Yellowdig where they use prompts, and they communicated that weekly rollover as a deadline for each topic. And you see all the students are waiting till Saturday and Sunday to participate. The most important thing, I think, is that the baseline of participation is actually way higher in this course. Students in this course model are participating, getting their grade at the end of the week, but they are not coming back in or sort of not coming in through most of the rest of the week nearly as much. So it's clear that the point system and sort of course setup can vastly influence the actual outcomes that you get. And just to sort of put the cherry on top of that, these are community health scores with every single Yellowdig community that's ever been established as of, I think it was January, with a health score that we created and compiled. And I'm going to jump into the health dashboard to show you how we're now surfacing this within the product itself. But these health scores are based on students posting above and beyond the course requirement, posting how many words they post above the minimum word count on average, and the number of posts and comments that they create. So, all of those metrics being higher would get you into a higher percentile score for that community. What we see is that communities that are using our best practices, things like putting more points for comments than posts, using the weekly rollover limit, point limit, setting your your turnover day some other day than Sunday. There's a whole list of best practices, but as you institute more of those best practices and use a more open community style, we tend to see all of these community health metrics go up. And that's a global pattern regardless of the community size. One thing that I think is super interesting and that we point out is that there is not a single community that's using most of our best practices that is falling, below sort of the 50th percentile in general. There's one or two down here, but there are none at all down here. That's so statistically improbable. I'm not sure how I would quantify it, but out of every single community that has ever been created, those that are using our best practices are all performing above standard or above typical, right? One thing that I think is interesting is that you don't see as many communities up here in the top left. So communities, especially for this large board set, right? So people that are ignoring a lot of those best practices, are not getting great outcomes in large communities. And you can see that there are quite a few people that can get those outcomes in smaller communities. What we're seeing basically is that these professors up here are really having to work really hard using really non-scalable sorts of practices that require a lot of work in order to get those results. And so what we really see is that, as you sort of ignore some of our best practices, you're not only more likely to have a failing community, but you're probably working really hard to get those better outcomes. There's about 10 minutes left, so I want to jump into our one of our newer features based on those health scores, and I want to make sure that we get a quick look at it. For some reason, my mouse is not showing up right now. 1 second. There we go. Oh, sorry, I went to the wrong spot. So we've just added this, some of this functionality to our community health area, and it's really interesting, I think, as a tool for instructors and other community admins to get better outcomes. So first of all, we're showing really high level stats for the community, the total number of posts and comments, what that breaks down to sort of per member of the community, per follower of the community, reactions to each other's posts that are posted. And we surface this conversation ratio. Now at Yellowdig, we think that this conversation ratio is like our #1 statistic because it predicts and is highly associated with almost every other statistic. But this is essentially just the number of comments per post. And so we want to see this number actually upward of something like 7 or 8 for a typical course. If you think about the standard discussion assignment, it would be 1 post and 2 comments. That would be a conversation ratio of 2. Quite frankly, that's not a conversation. These students really need to have a back and forth turn taking in order to be having real conversations, real discussions, right? And so it's important that that there's actually many posts or many comments per post, which indicate really stronger conversations. Within the health check area, I talked about a lot of those best practices. Some of them are listed here. These are the ones that we can easily detect from things that are set up in the community. So this is a quick check for anybody that's using Yellowdig to see what our recommendations are, and to go in here and change them if you want to make them align. But below this is where you can see the outcomes of your community, right? So beneath each of these is a set of graphs showing how your community compares against the global Yellowdig median, right? And so this community has not very many posts compared to or not very many words compared to the average Yellowdig community. And a percentile is created for each of these different metrics. and then average together to create the scores up here. So for things that are related to sharing, posting more comments, posting more words, sharing links, this is the average percentile of this board compared to the global Yellowdig average or median. And so this gives you a sense of how this community is sort of ticking compared to other communities in Yellowdig, and gives you a sense of whether there are things that you might be getting really good results with compared to other communities, or maybe really bad results. And the other thing that I would mention is that we think that actually listening and interacting are far more important than a lot of the sharing behaviors. So most standard discussion prompts and conversations are focused on, hey, you have to create posts. They don't think a lot about whether students are actually reading what's there, ingesting it, thinking about it, and then actually having back and forth conversations, right? So we're tracking and are going to increasingly add additional metrics into these areas related to listening and students interacting with each other, because we think that these are the metrics that actually drive real student engagement, or indicate real student engagement that is far beyond just coming and sort of doing your minimum number of posts and comments and then leaving. It's not hard to drive this, to drive these scores up by just requiring more and more posts. It is harder to get students to actually read more of the things that are posted, click on more links. It might be harder to get them to actually react to each other and talk with one another. So we have about 7 minutes left. I want to make sure that there's still some time for questions. So I'll open it to the floor and see what comes out.
There were two related questions that we can start with, and then maybe that'll get some thinking going for others, both related to data.
Okay.
One of the questions was about sort of the security of data, data privacy, and I'll just go ahead and address it, Brian, and then I'll pass the next question to you. All of the data that we've shared with you today in the platform is owned by our partners. You can access that data through a number of ways. We have API pathways that we can build. We can download CSVs and so forth. The studies that we've done, if they're published, those the information is it's subject to the partner as to what they want to publish, but there's never student identity that is disclosed in any of that, nor do students have the ability to get a sense for one another's grades. There are permissions in Yellowdig, and the students typically are members of these communities where they do not have the ability to export data or analyze this community health. Community health is an admin specific feature. The question was about, how one might actually analyze this data on their own. How does Yellowdig provide those exports? And maybe if you could speak to the process that you and your team use, Brian, in studying this, it'd be great.
Yeah, so we have a client success analyst, full-time employee that is helping do a lot of the sort of ad hoc or data visualizations for people if they have specific questions or want to see specific things, or maybe need some help with a presentation or something that they'd like to do. A lot of this data is available, inside of the platform to see sort of, high-level metrics. We are able to get student sort of click level data if you talk to us about some of that and sort of post bodies and things like that, that we would be able to export on a sort of ad hoc basis. And one of the things that will be coming very soon is the ability for admins to just go in and export CSVs that can be analyzed at really easily from just within the platform, pull it out, be able to sort of run whatever statistics you'd like to on whatever statistical package you might be familiar with using. So there's a lot of optionality for getting those out, and in the meantime, we can provide a lot of those reports. But those should be into the platform very shortly as really easy to grab CSVs. So.
Thanks, Brian. That covered that basis. We have a number of studies that we can share. If you're interested in thinking about how you might use Yellowdig data, one of the ways that we're seeing a lot of our data now be leveraged is just through telling and proving how instructors are creating regular and substantive interaction in courses. This is a new standard, regulation by the Department of Education that everyone will need to be mindful of if courses remain online. But the data, we're really flexible in how you might want to study it, and we have some smart folks, Brian and his team, that help you.
Yeah, and it's also true that the admins for a course are in most of the reports for Yellowdig. We're actually changing that wording there, but we're tracking activity for community facilitators, which would be like TAs and things like that, or the owners, along with all of the student activity. And in fact, everything that I was showing earlier in the community, this is the admin view. The student view is almost identical, except they don't see some of these other options that would show sort of the course level data or anything like that. Students won't see what other students are earning as far as points and things like that. But for example, the community owner and all of the other sort of admins of the board do earn a participation grade, just like students would, and they would see those up in the grading area. So you can sort of set goals for the set the goal for them, just like for students, and track track those metrics across any user in the community.
Yeah, we can help. If you're a department head that would be interested in understanding which of your professors is doing the best job at meeting students' needs, a great way to do that would simply be looking at that community health score and comparing faculty. I know we have a minute or so left. There aren't any new questions that I'm seeing in the chat or in the Q&A, but there have been a number of questions about how Yellowdig compares to other community building platforms. I guess I'm gonna go where I wanted to go with that thought, but before I do so, I do want to highlight that for anyone on today's webinar who is interested in getting started with us, we have a promotional offer that we are running in response to the COVID outbreak and what we believe is our best opportunity to meet the needs of students, and that is getting Yellowdig into your hands at no cost. You can reserve a spot. I will share the link in the chat here right now if you haven't already seen this. But Brian, while I pull this up, if you could go back to the platform and just click on first My Communities and then Discover. The reason that Microsoft Teams and that Slack are so relevant right now, they provide like really easy access to those extra communities, those additional social layers that the students are interested in. Yellowdig has all of that as well, but it's also baked into the LMS. And it's also backed by the efficacy data. So, sure, we might build an engineering study group that might live right now in Microsoft Teams or Slack. The difference with us is that we are going to understand the needs of those learners using data that you do not have access to in those other platforms. And I think it's a really important distinction to make. We were purposely built for education. So you're going to have all of those great opportunities for connection backed by data from other institutions doing very similar things that you're interested in. So let me grab the promotional link here and do what I said I was going to do. I've put it here in the chat.
The other answer I would just jump into there, Tyler, I think is, we're definitely showing, we're changing student behavior with the point system, right? And I think one thing that most of these other platforms are doing is simply providing the substrate on which people can interact. but they're not actually helping them to interact and sort of building up the start of those communities and encouraging that ongoing behavior, which actually ends up being really, really important to getting more and more people drawn into those communities. So Slack might have very many of the same capabilities in terms of students being able to interact with each other, but will they choose to do so in all of these different areas? And the point system helps bring more people into the fold, and that ends up being really important. And then the data that we have to support that on the back end lets us see students that aren't being pulled into the fold, and we're putting things like this visualization in right now to show students that might be participating, the students sort of posting, but is not actually engaging in conversations with their students. What we know from our data is that these students are the most likely to sort of drop out of a course, give up on school, or report dissatisfaction with certain aspects of their education. So that's an additional question, or sort of response to that question.
Brian, can you go to the slide that shows our best practices overlaid with student engagement? There was a question that just came up in the chat about like what our recommendation is on the minimum point requirement, not point requirement rather, but like the minimum weight that we might put on a Yellowdig discussion. And we do have good recommendations that we can make on, actually not just the point system. I'm sorry. Yeah, the older slide that we have. The reason I'm asking Brian to pull this up is because simply turning on this point system without even assigning a grade to it will, in the cases that we've studied, 2x your contributions from your students. So you might say, I don't want to grade this. Well, simply turning that point system on will increase the amount of engagement that you see. Then if you use the points and you grade this, we would recommend anywhere between a 5 to 15%. We do see some upper ends instructors using Yellowdig for as much as 25% of their final grade. But doing that then adds an additional 2x about to the kinds of.
To be clear, when we're talking about grading, we're not talking about you manually grading them.
Yes.
We're talking about just turning the points in Yellowdig and sending them to the LMS as a grade, right? So when we're saying grading, those are communities where we know that they're using the grade passback to the learning management system.
Important distinction.
Yeah.
We are over 5 minutes, but Brian and I are available. So I do see we still have a number of folks who are here. If you have questions that you would like to ask, please feel free to do so. Otherwise, I think that was about all that we had planned to cover today. Brian, thank you. Most of you have only done this once. This is Brian's fifth product webinar this month. So a big thank you from my team to Brian for leading these discussions. Otherwise, feel free to drop. We will send the recording, and we will look forward to having many conversations with all of you soon.
Happy to answer any questions. Again, if anybody has them, throw them up there.
Thanks, Brian. I see there's still a few folks hanging out, so maybe you and I wait a minute or two. There was a question about an example of Yellowdig in biology.
Yeah.
I don't know if we have a slide on that, but we can definitely speak to it.
I can actually look for that. I don't know if I do have the no. I don't have that in this. We get asked a lot about Yellowdig in technical courses or sort of science-based courses where it doesn't feel like a discussion is necessarily as relevant. We've seen people use it in a lot of different ways. One interesting thing that I think is that students actually find a lot of ways in which having discussions about the topic itself actually is relevant. or helps tie that specific topic to things that are happening in the real world, which helps them get more engaged in all aspects of the course. But one of our favorite use cases for really technical courses has been people simply using Yellowdig as sort of a replacement for office hours, where students are basically encouraged to post their questions and earn points for answering each other's questions. And then where the professor sort of says, you know, I won't come in and answer a question until it's been posted for 24 hours. If nobody else responds, I'll respond to it. If you really need my help, mention me. That's like raising my hand, you know, raising your hand in the course. And really just use it as a sort of Q&A / office hours opportunity. And that specific professor, Mackenzie Sutter at UNL, was using, was also doing synchronous Zoom sessions to help, you know, address office hours. And she asked the students, you know, which was preferable to them. They all, you know, said the Yellowdig was more helpful, and she's actually abandoning using the Zoom sessions in favor of Yellowdig at this point. So, you know, that's one that has definitely come up a lot for you know, technical courses, or even maybe, I don't want to say cut and dry courses, but things like finance, where you know, people say there's not a lot to discuss. It turns out there's more to discuss than most people think, but also that Q&A works wonderfully.
Yeah, and any of the lab-based assignments where students might have been collaborating, simply adding a topic in Yellowdig that allows them to start to organize materials that may help them to complete these assignments in a remote fashion. Given that Yellowdig is highly sortable and filterable, we find that in environments where you may not use a discussion, but you have a lot of group work, Yellowdig can be a really useful solution in that sense. And I'm most excited for a biology course to use the drawing feature, because I think in cases where you have students looking to annotate imagery to point out flaws, or I don't recognize this piece of the cell, what's going on here? Is there an infection, or whatever it might be, the conversation, you can upload and annotate that those drawings or those images right in the post. Giuseppe, I know that you're still on, and I just want to thank you for all of your fantastic questions. Often many people are thinking these questions, but it takes a few folks to ask them and to get these conversations started. Brian and I prefer to talk to people instead of just ourselves. So thank you. And Kim, I see that you're still on. We will make sure that you get this recording, and we can always schedule one-on-one conversations with you as well. Great. Yeah. Kim, I see you're mentioning in the chat here about how Yellowdig facilitates discussions about readings. Yellowdig is going to surface you data on who is reading and who is not, is one good example. And simply the diversity of the content in Yellowdig versus the repetitiveness that you might see in a normal discussion. We have data that suggests that Yellowdig promotes more reading, and that reading is actually higher correlated with actual learning outcome. We'll share those studies with you. We'll make sure that you get that information. All right, Brian, thank you. I'll see you virtually soon.
I was still watching. All right, see ya.